A frantic message echoes on every alien frequency. High command compromised. Defensive lines collapsed. Here comes the human warship. Imminent danger. Disbelief and dread spread through the ranks of alien rulers who had once dismissed humanity's mediocre power. Now, they are faced with the unimaginable. For millennia, the galaxy had run on a hierarchy ruled by vast alien empires. Decked out with advanced weaponry, ornate warships patrolled trade routes and border worlds. These factions represented the most exclusively violent entities imaginable. The only heroes were the ones that were quiet, and peace, like Groundhog Day, was a moment in time that never progressed beyond itself for as long as anyone could recall. These overlords enforced the galaxy's balance of power, from the battle-weathered warlords of the Drax Republic to the sly tacticians of the Varen Collective. Innumerable worlds bowed to their rule for a taste of order. It was commonly believed that humans, those strange bipeds who came from a small, blue planet, were little more than a curiosity. However, humans had shown a blip of ingenuity and adaptability when it came to interstellar travel, and most alien states had deemed them military irrelevant. Even the mercantile communities, notorious for exaggerating potential perils to defend lucrative trade, rejected the notion that humanity would ever pose a serious threat. They were interesting experimental technologies and unproven merchant fleets, but crews trained over generations by a millennium of war was simply considered too much in the galaxy. But deep in the twisting war rooms of the High Command on Zalthar, a fortress planet so bombarded with protective wards that entire squadrons patrolled its perimeter 24/7, a disaster was brewing, one no one could have foreseen. Gossip of a lone human warship traveling beyond the chartered trade lanes had registered an improbable rumor, then an eerie fact. Early intelligence assessments described it as a mid-sized craft with an unusual engine signature. Maybe an experimental scouting vessel, some speculated. Others speculated that it could be transporting secret cargo or conducting spying missions. In either case, the vessel was initially dismissed. After all, what could one single human craft do against the might of alien fleets? Then signs of disruption began to appear. Satellites along vital warp corridors went dark. Patrols dispatched to investigate did not return or sent only half-coherent distress calls before disappearing. There had been anomalous energy bursts detected in the outer systems, coincided with the ship's forward progress, unstoppable. In spite of the alien High Command's deep repository of knowledge and networks of spies, the nature of the warship's capabilities remained maddeningly elusive. The ship skipped from system to system, crippling communications arrays and disabling smaller fleet detachments before any cohesive defense could be organized. Inside High Command's strategic conference chamber, panic rippled. A long array of data streams that had once seemed neat and reassuring had scrolled with error messages. Wails and pleas from beleaguered garrisons flooded maps of allied territories. Alien general staffs had studied tactical projections that were, for the first time in decades, full of more question marks than certainties. And within all of this turmoil was the supreme warlord of Zalthar, a being of shadow and malice, Lord Vesrin. Infamous for crushing rebellions across 3 different continents in brutally effective fashions, Vesrin now gazed at the roiling holographic displays of the assaulted sectors with morbid incredulity. Other luminaries of alien power all sat at a massive, round table. Shrikash, a strategist par excellence from the reptilian Virash culture, wrapped long claws against the table, struggling to control his emotions. Nearby, a jittery intelligence officer from the insectoid Scarler species processed continuous streams of raw data. Her massive compound eyes struggled to process the dizzying scale of disruption. And then there was the stoic Admiral Regine, her amphibious features twitching with tension with every fresh wave of bad news that washed in. Key supply lines had been cut. Whole squadrons of them, advanced corvettes, had simply disappeared. The outposts, usually protected by impregnable defense shields, were destroyed. Their world's final transmissions were abruptly ended with static. As alarming news of these developments poured in, the improvised significance of a single human warship began to dawn, reverberating through the hall's high command. This was no fluke. This was no rumor. This was the work of a deadly, highly directed force. But that bold pattern of strikes was what most unsettled the alien leaders. Each blow was surgical, hitting the command nodes directly, the communication relays, the supporting infrastructure. Some outposts reported encountering prototype weaponry they had never faced before. Beams that sliced through advanced shielding like it was made of cellulose, pulse cannons firing with near-complete silence, yet wreaking incredible destruction, and fighter drones whose reaction time exceeded anything the aliens thought humanity was able to engineer. And with each new find, the dread gripping the high command deepened. As the crisis deepened, rumors erupted of fissures developing in the alien chain of command. Warlords blamed strategists for incompetence. Strategists said intelligence officers had withheld critical data, and intelligence officers asked to sift through messy sensor logs. Finger-pointing erupted into heated arguments, the chamber's artfully crafted protocol collapsing into chaos. If the High Command couldn't unite against this threat, how could they expect to contain an enemy that had already slipped from their grasp at every turn? Resources were mobilized at a breakneck pace, but the feeling of unpreparedness hung over everyone like a black shroud. Elite shock troopers were inserted with little command control, freshly minted interceptors were scrambled from distant hangars, and classified defense platforms were activated. But each successive line of defense went quiet without comment or was simply blown to smithereens moments after coming into contact with the warship. Questions mounted. Were these truly done by humans? Or was it the sly ruse of an inscrutable enemy taking human signatures as a smokescreen? Did the humans actually discover new energy sources or propulsion methods that would have rivaled even the most ancient interstellar empires? The High Command required answers, but what they required far more desperately was victory. Even a bit of evidence that they could inflict pain on this foe or stop its rampage would bolster the morale of their increasingly fractious coalition. Soon, the issue grew more than embarrassing. Alien bastions with millions of subjects within also stood at the mercy of the invincible warship's onslaught. Entire star systems reported losing contact with local governance or command ships. No one could say with any certainty who the warship's next target might be. So many guesses appeared to be destroyed in the ship's tumultuous movements, rendering tactical cornerstones to dust. Should this rampage continue, entire sectors that were once considered beyond the reach of such calamity could fall like sandcastles into a building tide. As day after day of increasing crises dragged on, an unavoidable epiphany settled among the upper reaches of the High Command. Humanity was no longer a mere sideshow in the imperium of cosmic theater. The alien leaders had, in their hubris, failed to consider the likelihood that humans, with their fledgling technology and smaller fleets, might dedicate their resources to a single, highly specialized vessel. In the face of catastrophe, maybe the human survival instincts had pushed them to create something radical, something that was what you'd need to fight asymmetric warfare against a larger, but more top-heavy opponent. By the time the High Command truly grasped the implications of this threat, it was nearly too late. They had once believed their empire would never be challenged, only to now face the shocking prospect that one lone human warship could threaten even the greatest fleets in the galaxy. The heart of their once unassailable empire was at risk, and the panicked voices spilling through every comm channel all sang one terrifying refrain. We cannot stop it. Our lines are broken. And so, the stakes grew higher with every passing moment. Could the alien High Command restore order and neutralize this threat before it became too great to contain? Or would this one vessel, driven by human pluck, bring down an empire that had lasted for centuries? The introduction had concluded with the balance of the galaxy hanging in the balance on a knife edge. Under an unrelenting flood of anxiety, frantic requests for reinforcements, and the creeping awareness that the unstoppable had already come. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any this galaxy had ever witnessed. Across the capital city of Zaldar, alarms were blaring. Heavy steel gates slammed shut along the fortress perimeter, while warships in low orbit went to red alert. In the High Command's central tower, alien officers rushed to and fro on multiple levels, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of orders and panic. Tactical displays in the primary briefing suite flickered with views of an inescapable sepulcher, the dreaded outline of the human warship. It had first made an appearance in the distant asteroid belts of the Zaldar system, coming out of warp with a smooth, almost predatory grace. Witnesses who got an indirect look at it described a ship that exhibited the telltale characteristics of human design: stark, angular plating, engines that glimmered with a unique cobalt tint, but was orders of magnitude larger than any ship made by humankind in the historical record. It also bristled with external devices whose function confounded even the best alien analysts. Just days earlier, the warship had been the subject of rumors and second-hand accounts, now at a reality looming just outside this star system's defensive perimeter. Hostile groupings of alien warships, previously so well organized, found themselves unable to form a coherent defense. The human ship had apparently developed, or maybe always had, a way to jam the High Command's communication frequencies, reports said. Fleet skippers sat in the cockpits of advanced cruisers, impotently watching their target overlays flicker on and off. Orders from command ships went unheard, no relay off, or too late to matter. The disciplined alien fleets that had coordinated both their attacks and movements were now scattered and lost. Meanwhile, on the surface of the capital, word of the warship's imminent arrival spread like wildfire, sparking yet another wave of fear. The citizens who had thought they were safe behind the shields of their planets would no longer take comfort in the existence of such defenses. The same invincible enemy had simply punched holes through similar shielding systems in other star systems. Certain districts scrambled to evacuate in a panic. Queues of hover transports snaked through city streets, shuffling a fearful populace to concealed subterranean bunkers. Above, groups of alien interceptors flew in scrambled formations, desperately attempting to keep at least a facade of readiness. Yet the human warship drew closer. It destroyed or disabled every wave of interceptors and frigates that were dispatched to intercept it. The High Command's famed dreadnoughts, dubbed the alien sword, axe, or hammer, drifted like dead stars once their engines and communication arrays were blasted to rubble by techno-wizardry beam weaponry. The pattern of attacks became clear over time. The human ship always went for propulsion and comm systems first, and things that had once seemed formidable were left dead in place. Then it would move on, never bothering even to destroy them unless it had to. This tactic demoralized alien crews and deprived each successive wave of new ships of vital intelligence. Across the void, battles raged. Savage dogfights broke out around the warship's hull. The alien defenders watched the night sky light up in brilliant flashes of color and energy from the ground. Yet despite the maelstrom of laser beams and missile contrails, the human craft seemed eerily orderly in its movements. Whenever it seemed poised to be pinned down by alien fighters, the warship would undergo an impossibly rapid change of momentum or send out war drones that obliterated entire squads. Whispers spread in the ranks of the hostiles that the ship was equipped with a cognitive intelligence that learned to outfly rote maneuvers, or that it was manned by an elite copy of himself, each of its morphologies trained for a brain-to-brain synchrony with every other. No explanation was definitive, just the terrible, unarguable fact of its superiority in speed and firepower. In other parts, alien leaders fought an ethereal enemy, panic. In the formerly unshakable halls of the High Command, tempers flared at the slightest provocation. Warlords called for a showdown. Strategists clung to the idea of luring the warship into a trap, mugging the system's vulnerabilities in an alluring fashion. Intelligence operatives suggested infiltration teams that could seize or undermine the vessel, but none of these proposals were ever put into practice. Communications lines went dark at critical junctures. Infiltration teams either disappeared or returned empty-handed, and the warship fell not for any of the decoys. As the days wore on, the alien forces came to another, more chilling realization. The warship was not only methodically destroying their military capacity, but also their lines of leadership. Each time a high-ranking official succeeded in commanding a sector, that official's flagship was next on the warship's hit list. Slowly but surely, the chain of command began to break. Session after session of strict hierarchy, designed to keep these various alien races under one banner, crumbled in days of the warship's path of chaos. The once mighty admirals and warlords were now in full retreat, their forces decimated, their credibility in ruins. No one in the high command had ever been so utterly humiliated by what they once considered an inferior race. Terms such as humans and earthlings turned into cursed languages in the alien ranks, hurled with terror and rage. All the years of painting humans as nothing but cosmic upstarts now also sounded hollow against the stark reality that one human warship was crippling their empire. As these truths sunk in, a united desperation took hold. It came on the 23rd day of fighting, as an armada more than 1,000 angry alien warships, called their factions, and the feuding those factions engaged in, had united in the largest armada focusing on a single coordinate ever since the Great Unification Wars. Admiral Regine, who enjoyed the reputation of having led campaigns in a dozen systems, was appointed to nominal command of this vast armada. Their strategy was simple in principle: barrage the human war vessel with quantity. If they were unable to match its technology or cleverness, they would drown it in irresistible firepower. Cruisers, carriers, and battle frigates rallied around a central command ship like a tapestry alive and stretched across the dark void, waiting for the warship's arrival. For a change, the communications jamming seemed less effective, perhaps because the warship had opted to face them directly. This had stirred up some hope among the alien ranks. Could it be that the monstrous human vessel had finally bitten off more than he could chew? The armada unfolded into an immense encirclement formation, methodically efficient. Swarm after swarm of smaller fighter craft fluttered around in interception patterns, ready to pounce at the first hint of the enemy. In the center of this formidable ring, Admiral Regine stood on the command deck and studied the main display, which only showed the starfield, empty, silent, waiting. At last, on the scanner, the warship showed its face, the signature of its warp drive scattering directly into the heart of the alien blockade. For a few moments, an almost reverent silence descended. Then the alien ships unleashed all they had: beams, missiles, projectiles of every size, and on a dozen different trajectories, all wrapped around that single point in space. The volley was blinding. The collective fire of 1,000 ships formed a ceaseless river that no ship could hope to survive. Or so it seemed. As the barrage dissipated, sensors showed the warship was not destroyed. Shield emissions flickered like mad around its perimeter, obviously taxed by the monumental onslaught, but incredibly still intact. It responded with a single broad-brush counterattack, the warship unleashed. The response could be a massive release of energy that spread outward. It was not a standard explosive, but a finely tuned pulse that confused the targeting computers and cut communications throughout the entire alien fleet. Consoles went dark. Weapons refused to fire, their safeties offline. Engines sputtered, derailed in calibration. Within seconds, the carefully organized armada lay in tatters. Ships started bashing into each other or drifting hopelessly, their sophisticated guidance systems dumbfounded and inoperative. Fleets that had never known loss were undone by a single, massive wave of energy. And then, like a blood-debt ghost, the warship glided through the chaos and shot down capital ships one by one with its precise pulses. The cosmic night was lit up by explosions, each one marking the loss of another key vessel and of the thousands of alien lives aboard. That combined fleet, described as the Empire's last bastion, was methodically dismantled. Admiral Regine could do little more than watch the meltdown, aghast. Her communications lines to the rest of the High Command were cut. Her repeated efforts to regroup the fleet, or even agree on a retreat, dissolved in static. In that instant, it hit home. It did not matter how sly, or how many they cadged together. The Empire was no match for the unstoppable human war machine. And so the conflict transitioned from an unmanageable problem to an existential threat. One by one, systems had their defenses drained, their leaders cut down. A psychological toll began to emerge. Proud soldiers serving the Empire trembled at the thought of facing this unstoppable force. Local governors abandoned their posts, fleeing to distant, unaligned sectors and hoping to avoid the inevitable. A few alien warlords tried to save face by delivering broadcasts about some etheric end times where ultimate vengeance would be wrought. But their declarations failed to carry any weight when the unrelenting warship bulkhead was methodically slicing through their cohesive reprisals. Suddenly, The formerly sneering allusions to weak humans became a hushed reverential talk about the cunning and resilience that must have motivated the warship's design. The otherworld species that had laughed at the planet Earth's relatively recent venture into interstellar matters now stared into a mirror held carefully in front of them, with every facet reflecting what they had previously assumed was a fringe idea. They found that humanity's turbulent history with spaceflight had formed an unconventional approach to solving problems, a world away from their staid traditions. Maybe man had taken advantage of the complacency due to centuries of alien dominance. However, it was not the case. Humans were on the verge of winning. In boardrooms and bunkers throughout the Empire, desperate last-ditch measures were debated. Maybe the High Command could buy off the humans to stop their warship's forward movement? Perhaps they could give away whole sections of land for peace? But there was no direct hotline ping on the warship. Any contact was met with silence or immediately jammed. Diplomatic envoys, who had ventured close to the vessel, never returned. If humans hoped to negotiate, they showed no sign of it. The warship's single-minded march went unopposed. Hidden amid the din was a reluctant, at least slightly uncomfortable realization that a few alien officers and their aides ventured to express more quietly. The conflict was not simply about punishing an arrogant empire. It was about bringing down the whole edifice of oppression that had held humans and millions of other species in thrall for generations. With every unstoppable blow, the warship was exposing the vulnerability at the center of this domineering system that offered a new angle that gave the conflict greater gravity. If the High Command fell, countless vassal worlds could rejoice in liberation. If previously compliant oppressed sectors revolt en masse, it's hard to blame them, considering that the Empire had suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of a lone human ship. And so, the conflict careened toward a culminating moment that no alien strategist could have predicted only a month earlier. With every new day came new revelations of cunning tactics and unstoppable blows. The relentless rise of the warship disrupted supply lines, destroyed leadership vessels, and shattered confidence at every level of the Empire. The alien High Command, once so confident of its supremacy in the cosmic order, now found itself scrambling to maintain even a shred of its former dominion, or, perhaps, to live at all. While the galaxy tore itself apart, and the alien High Command threw out any semblance of tactics, the inevitable advance of the human warship reached its final act. Every strategic advantage, every intercept plan, every rallying of forces had been methodically negated. So now, beneath the glare of a dark red sun at the center of the Zaldar system, all eyes looked up to the skies for the concluding showdown. Orbiting the fortress planet was the final line of defense, a smattering of battered capital ships, each bearing the scars of previous confrontations, and a handful of defense platforms that had long been considered to be obsolete. Lord Vesrin stood in the command tower's main observation deck and could not hide his frustration etched into his craggy features. He had once commanded armies that had been unstoppable, ones that had crushed rebellions on infinities of galaxies. And yet here he rode been, utterly helpless to respond to the silent, methodical approach of a lone human craft. Automated turrets swiveled into place on the fortress world's perimeter, barrel-like structures gleaming in the dying light of day. If the aliens were going to lose, they were going to lose fighting. In the last hours before the clash, a glimmer of hope appeared. Worldwide, techs scrambled in a frantic effort to implement an all-new defensive system. Leaning over control panels and studying data about captured sensor readings, the crew began to notice patterns in the frequencies of the warship's shields, theorizing a narrow window of vulnerability that they might exploit. It felt like a Hail Mary, and desperation had become the Empire's modus operandi. The plan, which was codenamed Operation Last Horizon, relied on a marking of the fortress planet's planetary defense cannons, the capital ship's beam arrays, and a pair of specialty electromagnetic pulse from older types of orbital platforms. If perfectly timed, the combined energy wave could overload or at minimum disrupt the warship's shielding for a key instant. Then a final volley from the largest cannons might cripple its primary reactor. That, and the unstoppable juggernaut, might finally be tamed. However, time was short. The warship had engaged forward defenses, blasting it too, and most other turrets and smaller vessels into shape, floating debris. The skies of Zalthar shone with the destruction of interceptor after interceptor. Swarm after swarm of drone fighters tried to break the warship's path, only to evaporate within seconds, like ephemeral aerial fireworks. The orbital bombardment echoed like thunder on the ground. Citizens sought refuge in underground bunkers, praying to gods they once held inviolable with their eyes closed. Finally, the dreadful human warship came within range of the fortress planet's deadliest weapon, the Ion Devastator, a gargantuan cannon mounted on a man-made plateau in the southern hemisphere. Fueled by geothermal vents that tapped into the planet's molten core, the Ion Devastator was reportedly capable of shredding through the hull of any battleship, no matter how thick. If any individual weapon still existed that had the power to challenge the warship's destructive might, it was this. API image. Officers from issuing alien command posts uttered the Ion Devastator's name with a mix of despair and reverence. With the combined fleet in ruins, Admiral Regine stood on the command deck for Operation Last Horizon, observing as the final alignment was set. She ordered the battered remnant of the capital fleet to open fire first, attracting the warship's notice. Lancing beams of light splayed through space, embroidering a curtain of defense that left the human ship no choice but to maneuver. As it evaded and eliminated each threat, the orbital platforms came into alignment, their ancient electromagnetic capacitors pulsing with fresh energy. Direct all targeting solutions to that spot there, Regine barked, indicating a barely perceptible distortion in the warship's shield matrix captured by a previous firing. The techs rushed around with controlled panic, tuning frequencies, pouring power into the banks, and cross-referencing the data. A single misstep would be catastrophic, likely ruining the entire planet. At last, the warship was hovering directly in the Ion Devastator's crosshairs, likely not by accident, but due to its own tactical arrogance. Sensors detected a sudden surge in the warship's reactor, a telltale indication that it was about to release a wave of destruction of its own. It had to be now, if the aliens were going to strike. It was Admiral Regine who gave the order. In an event rehearsed only in theory, the capital ships discharged simultaneously, beams converging on the warship's coordinates. The Napoli demons were even less fortunate as the battered orbital platforms released a synchronized electromagnetic pulse that warped local space-time beneath an energetic wave which crackled with fury. The Ion Devastator, overstretched and in dire straits, dislodged the shattering lance of ionized plasma. For a split-second space appeared to tear itself open, as if the fabric of reality itself couldn't withstand the pure energy directed at the ship of mankind. And in the middle of that cataclysmic display, something unremarkable occurred. The warship's shields failed. Sensor readouts flared across every console, showing a spike in the craft's energy systems. Explosive shockwaves rippled across its hull. For one heartbeat, it seemed as if the Empire's last gamble might pay off. The warship staggered, half-veiled in roiling plasma. There were cheers in the command centers. Had they done it? But as the dust and plasma settled, the warship stood, battered but still operating. Deep trenches scarred the Ion Devastator's once mighty beam, sending visible debris off into orbit. But the vessel continued to churn ahead, unstoppable even at its wounded state. There was silence on the High Command's communications. A quivering despair gripped them. If their best weapon hadn't worked, what else could defeat this monster? In that instant, the warship was exacting a final, devastating revenge. Dazzling beams erupted from its forward array, striking home in the Ion Devastator and the orbital platform's critical systems. S-ring across the sky, explosions popped, tearing the defector buildings apart in a shower of sparkling orange-red fireballs. When those containment fields failed, the Ion Devastator, once the planet's most fearsome symbol of might, crumbled and imploded in on itself in a final, wide-reaching, impotent conflagration that incinerated the plateau and everything around it. The planetary shields went out with a flicker. The beleaguered capital ships scattered. Some captains went to emergency warp to leave the system entirely. Others just surrendered to terror, shutting down engines and drifting aimlessly, praying that the warship would ignore them. And from one alien to another, word spread like a plague. The unending human ship was still alive, and it was furious. Above Zaldar, it then made its final, fatal decision. It moved upon the High Command's most recent operational command vessel, a massive dreadnought that had been a watermark of alien strength. Lord Vesrin, who was scrambling to shift his command structure, couldn't escape the warship as it carved into the dreadnought's hull. These monster-made barriers fizzled. The dreadnought tore in half, the explosion of internal compartments. Escape pod flechettes ejected in a flurry, but the nerve center of alien command and control had just been vaporized, down to the last entry in the fray. With no command vessel and no cohesive chain of command, the alien forces broke apart like leaves in a gale. Over the next hours, the destroyer methodically obliterated or disabled any final strongpoint, specifically targeting nodes that could bring the Empire's leftover defenses to bear. Orbital fortresses that once inspired a sense of invincibility now drifted as floating scrap. Every critical blow reverberated throughout the system, sending ripples, literal and psychological, through the splintering Empire. Finally, the unrelenting assaults ceased. Having fulfilled its purpose with surgical precision, the warship aborted any further fire and set its course out of the Zaldar system. The wrecked remains of the alien fleets were silent, stunned. Fields of debris traced orbits around the planet. Remote starports shimmered with the dancers of uncontrolled reactor leaks. Once impregnable fortresses now slumber in cosmic night. In the final climactic offensive, the human warship had wiped out the Empire's seat of power. Generals, admirals, and strategists who had survived watched in horror from their blasted vantage points as the craft glided away. Some summoned their courage to try to pursue, but their mangled ships were not going to defend themselves. Others simply cried at the scale of their downfall. Those who had once deemed themselves the apex of galactic civilization found themselves adrift in the rubble, impotent, humbled, and leaderless. Throughout the galaxy, word of the Empire's fall raced at light speed along the comm networks that the warship hadn't destroyed. Subjugated worlds that had been compelled to pay heavy tribute heard of the humiliating fall. There were many who took the opportunity of revolt as the chains of the alien overlords fell from around them. Alliance treaties collapsed, and whole regions dissolved into unbridled anarchy as local governors and warlords fled to safety or hidden well within their borders. But perhaps the most humbled of all were the legions of alien civilizations that had looked on from the sidelines. They had settled into the notion that humans were irrelevant. Now, they understood that humanity had not only a powerful weapon, but also the audacity to hit the Empire's heart. In the echoes of that telling victory, the galaxy came to learn that the old order had itself been unbound by something altogether newer. The resolution thus came crashing in, a thunderwave of finality and transformation. For humanity, it was a victory of craftiness, technology, and the untested stuff of will. For the alien empire, it was a cataclysmic blow that scattered its forces, shattered its leadership, and violated its once unassailable power as shockingly fragile. All the scoreboards of power had been rewritten in an instant. And in the emptiness above Zaldar, where the deepest, most impregnable of fortress worlds had been scourged, floated the unutterable, yet undeniable fact: the galaxy would never again be the same. For weeks after the final strike, clouds of debris and smoke choked the orbit of Zaldar. Ships from neutral systems saw an opportunity to curry favor or gain influence, arriving to help with the recovery effort. It was a grim spectacle. The alien warships, once so proud, lay half-sunken in the planet's gravity well, their shattered hulls reflecting the fires that still burned on the surface below. Across the survivors, the new reality was sinking in, one in which the imperishable High Command had been brought down by a single human warship. One was Shrikash, the master tactician of the Vierash clan. Picked up from a brutalized shuttle that had gone adrift in orbit, Shrikash was taken to an emergency medical station where he spent days recovering from the effects of plasma burns. Delirious from both the pain and the drugs, he muttered over and over about how the warship had outsmarted them at every step, how every standard protocol had been bypassed, every castle turned to dust. Once clear again, he started writing what he called the Chronicles of Defeat, desperately trying to spare future generations the arrogance that had destroyed them. In scattered bunkers across the shattered planet, a few leaders emerged from their hideouts to gloat over the destruction. With Lord Vesrin believed to be dead, a leadership vacuum arose. Disputes over territory or remnants of the fleet started immediately. Others, particularly the medicos, were clamoring for a ceasefire to negotiate with humanity before the last of the Shivis was buried. Others sermonized about vengeance, pledging to rebuild fleets and retake the offensive. But there was no question. How could they possibly successfully oppose the unstoppable power of that human warship if it ever returned? News agencies, both alien and human, deluged the interstellar broadcast wavelengths with reports of the cataclysm. Footage of the warship's final charge against the dreadnought cycled in loops on screens nearby, along with speculation about where it came from. Pundits speculated whether it was powered by some unheard-of energy source, or whether it was just the result of centuries of focus from human engineers, all that time compressed into a construction project. Conspiracy theories had thrived, from accusations of the humans having stolen ancient alien technology, all the way to the theory that they had made a deal with some otherworldly beings beyond the known universe. For humanity, its sailors, faces still largely unrevealed, instantly became legends. Rumor had it that when they returned to their home systems, they were met with parades, celebrations, and people that universally adored them. Entire worlds burst aflame with celebrations, revering them as the saviors who struck down a titan who had regarded Earth as a passing irritant at best. Diplomatic channels lit up with new alliance proposals. Newly liberated worlds wanted to hitch their fortunes to the ascendant species that had just proven itself so fearsome. Much of the human leadership had been battling the staggering implications of what had happened behind a triumphant veneer. They had cut the head off a vast alien empire, sure, but they had, in so doing, left a power vacuum that threatened to descend whole sectors into chaos. Rebel groups and pirate clans could take the opportunity to carve out their own mini-empires, and other alien powers may regard humanity's display of strength with fear and suspicion. Yet few would contest that the defeat of the warship had opened a new era. Farthest reaches of the galaxy were abuzz with tales of how the human race had overturned the status quo in weeks. Decades of oppression crumbled, and millions of species looked forward with renewed hope. For those old soldiers, the sight of the once mighty alien armada rent asunder was reassurance that no empire, even the most time-worn, was invulnerable. Reconstruction efforts began on the battered remains of Zalvar. A coalition of species, some allied to mankind, descended upon the stricken world to provide relief, medicine, and technology. Former alien functionaries slowly retired, aware that the Empire's hold was over for good. A handful of disgraced alien factions, incensed at their inglorious defeat, withdrew to the outermost reaches of the galaxy. Their bitterness coiled like a dormant volcano, fanning talk of revenge in dark corners. It was unclear whether these resentful holdouts would coalesce into something strong enough to assault humanity again. On Earth, the warship's crew were received as heroes. Their names and likenesses were enshrined in halls of honor, studied by cadets at every military academy. But beneath the celebrations and the headlines hung whispers that the future could be as dangerous as the war that had just concluded. The sudden overthrow of the alien empire didn't just liberate the galaxy from tyranny. It unleashed a series of unforeseen consequences that would influence politics, trade, and warfare for decades. And with that, the galaxy turned a page. The reign of the alien high command had come to an end, in fire and shame. One human warship had decimated centuries of tyrannical pecking order. In its wake arose a cosmic order that struggled to hold, fraught as it was with the question, what does humanity do with its newfound ranking? Would it become a good shepherd, building alliances and liberating enslaved worlds? Or would it succumb to the lure of totalitarianism as well? For now, at least, the worst crisis had passed. The menacing warship had disappeared in the folds of space, its mission accomplished. But its legend lingered, stamped into each star chart and mistrusted planetary conjecture. The empire that had once looked down on humanity lay in ruins, and those who lived could only wonder what a world in the hands of those who had forgot their past would look like. So ended the greatest war the galaxy had ever known, a war that would be studied and argued over for lifetimes. Within the wreckage halls of the High Command's old headquarters, The sounds of alien footfalls were replaced by silence. The place a grim shrine to pretension and ambition brought low by irresistible force. And through that silence, the galaxy realized one crucial truth. To not take seriously a powerful enemy never lurks across the brink from you can lead to an end not even the mightiest empire is ready to comprehend. The war was over, but the consequences would be felt for generations. Names of the warship and its crew would float through the fleet in whispers, a mix of fear, admiration, and wonder. In its wake of this new epoch, the strong had been toppled and the weak exalted. There was but one truth that stood unquestioned. Humanity had irrevocably altered interstellar history, and the galaxy would never be the same.